Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today we celebrate the 1990 debut of A Tribe Called Quest, one of the most innovative and most interesting, and I would say one of the most timeless hip-hop groups in the history of the genre. Now, they burst onto the scene in terms of their first album in 1990, and the 90s was a pivotal decade for hip-hop from both an artistic and a commercial sense. Now, I've talked a lot on this channel. You can check out the previous videos on this about how Dr. Dre and others helped invent the G-Funk sound that really gave West Coast hip hop a domineering identity sonically. People like Ice-T and NWA gave it an identity in terms of the lyricism, reality rap, as the artist called it at the time, gangster rap, as the industry named it, and it stuck for reasons we can talk about. But in terms of the production, in terms of the sonics, it was really at the very edge of the 1980s, but really in the 1990s when G-Funk began to define an entire genre of West Coast hip hop, which really helped to set it apart both musically and lyrically from its East Coast rival, let's say. Even though, as we know now, a lot of the rivalry not only came later, but it was sort of ginned up a bit. Yeah, Tim Dog was one of the first to mention it, but it was more of a mid 90s thing. But what is interesting from a musical point of view is that while hip hop did really derive from New York and the East Coast scene, by the 90s, there were many interesting subgenres, even within these sort of coastal scenes. And all the while, Houston and Atlanta were developing an interesting dual southern scene of their own. Now, in the East Coast, A Tribe Called Quest really helped to do to the East Coast sound what Dr. Dre and Warren G and DJ Quick and DJ Pooh and people like that did to the West Coast sound, in that they brought it into a 90s era that was less reliant on sort of very fast tempo samples that were just being thrown at you left and right over a steady sort of Roland drum machine beat, and instead created stuff that was really almost like, and I don't like the term, but for lack of a better term, almost like acid jazz. They took the kinds of music that was popular in that acid jazz scene, and in terms of mainstream jazz, they incorporated that too, and they created soundscapes, rhythmic soundscapes that were really like nothing that came before, and many copied them since, but no one really did it quite as convincingly as A Tribe Called Quest. The music sort of described as sort of very laid back, some would even call it relaxing. And while I think the music is far too stimulating and interesting to be called relaxing, it's nevertheless notable for being something that was much more laid back than the more sort of rock'em sock'em type of hip hop beats that you would associate with things like Public Enemy or LL Cool J stuff in the mid and late 80s. And throughout the 90s, they continued to develop and refine their sound. 1991's The Low End Theory became a classic of this genre that some called alternative rap, some called jazz rap. But again, these were mainstream rap albums by a mainstream hip hop group that was just creating really interesting sounds. And this, of course, continued in the 1993 album Midnight Marauders. And throughout the 90s, they were producing really, really good material. Now, what this shows is that when a genre is having a kind of renaissance period, so many different things are fused together because, like what John McLaughlin said, all music is at the end of the day fusion because we're all influenced by other things. And as a genre matures, it's going to necessarily incorporate other elements of the wider musical world. Jazz did this, rock and roll did this, classical, European classical music did it. Every genre does it. And that's why, for me, the 1990s was that golden age of hip hop. Creativity was running high, new sounds were being explored, new ways to make the sounds were being explored. And that's why, if I had to say it, my favorite East Coast hip hop group of the 90s was none other than A Tribe Called Quest. They really made their sonic mark and they made it so, so well. As always, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.